Have you ever wanted to perform a specific task on your node server at specific times without actually running the command yourself? Maybe you need to schedule a daily email or a database backup. Luckily, node-cron is here to help, and it allows us to use cron tab syntax to schedule our functions. Before we jump into that though, if you like regularly scheduled programming videos, make sure to subscribe. And if you like a regular newsletter about scaling and building software, make sure to sign up for the Hacking Scale newsletter. I'll leave a link to that in the description down below. But now let's look at how node-cron can help us out. So here in VS Code, I have an example node.js project. This one's just an empty node project with an index.js there. Our first step is going to be to install the node-cron package. So using a package manager of your choice, in my case, npm, do npm install and then node-cron like so. Once we've done that, we can actually go ahead and start to use it. We're going to import that here. We're going to import cron, and that's going to be from that node-cron package we just installed. Now, you may already have a function that you want to schedule, but for me, I'm going to need a dummy function to show you guys essentially the scheduling. So I'm going to call that something like export data. And then inside of here, I'm just going to do a simple console log with a name. So let's say I have a name here. We'll call this something like report1. And then after this, let's say I do console.log. And then we'll say something like exported, and then I'll put in the name. So this is just my dummy function to show you guys the scheduling here. And you're actually already ready to get started scheduling, especially if you already know the cron expression syntax. So if you do cron.schedule here, and we run this as a function, what you can see is this is going to take in two arguments. The first one is the cron expression, and the next one is the function. Now, if you don't know what cron expressions are, luckily there's a website that can help you out. If you go to cron tab guru like this, what you'll see is it's explaining this cron tab syntax here into plain English, essentially. Another cool trick as well is to ask ChatGPT in plain English for the cron expression that you want, and then you can maybe come into this website as well and paste it in to make sure that it's correct for what you expected. But as you can see in here, we have at the moment, this is going to run at every minute. You can hit random a few times as well, and you can see the really powerful scheduling that you can do with cron syntax. This is going to run at 4 AM on every day of the month from the 8th through to the 14th. So from the 8th day of the month through to the 14th, it's going to run at 4 AM every day. So you can see you can get some really powerful syntax there. And there's also at weekly here. I don't know if node-cron supports this one. It's also worth noting as well, node-cron supports an extra column, which is 4 seconds. So you can actually go one above this and then schedule something to happen X amount of seconds. Another cool thing as well is, let's say I did this syntax here. What you'll notice, this says at minute 5. This is not actually running every 5 minutes. What this is doing is running at the 5th minute of every hour. So it also shows you when it's next going to run, and that's going to be at 12:05 here. But what you could see is if I do something like, let's say, */5, this is a step value, and this one here is going to run at every 5th minute. So you can come in here and play around and get the exact expression that you want. This is the example of the one I'm going to use, but I'm going to add an extra column here, and that's going to make it run every 5 seconds. So if I go ahead and I copy this here, if I now go back to my code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this line we just had, and I'm going to make sure that our cron expression is valid first. So if I do something like, let's say, const con expression, or cron expression like so, and then that's going to equal to, and then I'm going to paste in the value that I got. Now, as I said, at the moment, this one here is going to run every 5 minutes. We're just going to simply add an extra asterisk here, so it's essentially another column, and now this is going to run every 5 seconds. But maybe you're loading this in from a node environment variable, or maybe you have some configuration from somewhere else that you're loading this in from. So it's a good idea to check that it's valid first. So what we'll do is const is valid, and then we'll do here cron dot, and then you can do dot validate, and then here we can put in our cron expression. And then underneath this, I'm just going to do console.log, and then I'll do the template literal, and then I'll do is expression valid, and then we can do the template literal, and we'll put in is valid like so. Now if I go ahead and I run this, we can do node and then index.js like so. What you see is we get is expression valid true. Now, just to show you, if I put something random in here and then I save that, if we now run this, you'll see we'll get is expression valid, and that will print out false there. So that's a quick check that you could do, and then maybe you could throw an error or something like that, and then do some other logic if the cron expression that you've got is not valid. Once we've done that though, and we do know that we've got a valid cron expression, we can go back to our cron.schedule. And then in here, we're just going to put in that cron expression. Obviously, if you do know your cron is valid and you're not going to change it or something like that, you could just copy this string here and paste it in as the first argument instead. Now, the second argument, you could technically put the function you want to run, like the export data, but it's generally a good idea to do a function like so. And then inside of here, we're going to run our export data function like this. Now, if I run node.index.js, what we should see is it will start to export report 1 every 5 seconds. So there we go. After 5 seconds, it said exported report 1 there. And you've gone ahead and you've successfully already scheduled a function. Next, what we're going to look at though is customizing this function a bit and being able to pass in data. So if I close out of this terminal here, let's say I changed my export data function here to, instead of defining the name inside, to have just name passed in as a parameter. Once we've done that, I'm going to define a list of names here. So let's say I do const names. And then inside of here, let me just quickly add something like, let's say report 1, report 2, and then also a report 3, like so. So every 5 seconds, what I want it to do is export a different report. So it's going to be report 1, and then after 5 seconds, report 2, report 3, and then to loop over this. To do that, what we're obviously going to have to do is keep track of the number of runs that we've done. So for me, we'll do let runs and then equal 0. This is why it's quite good to use this syntax here and create your own arrow function inside of here, because as well, you can also use some different things, like you can get the date that it was run at if you want to start logging that out, as you can see here. And then we can also pass this some options in later, which you'll see when we handle or manage our tasks, whether you want to stop them or to defer when they actually schedule. But inside of here, now that we've got that, what we can do is we need to keep track of the runs we're on. So export data, as I said, that now takes in the name instead. So we need to have a method of getting a name out of here. For that, we'll do names, and then I'm just going to use the number of runs here for getting out that name. And then inside of here, what we'll do is we'll also set the runs. Now, obviously you can do runs plus plus, but a cool shorthand for adding in the logic to essentially make sure that the amount of run, or this number here, doesn't go above the amount that we've got in this array, is you can do something like runs equals, and then you do runs plus 1, and then you do remainder of the array length. So I'm going to do names.length here. So as I said, this is shorthand here essentially to make sure that we're not getting to runs 3, 4, 5, 6. Instead, it's going to go 0, 1, 2, and then reset 0, 1, 2 each time. This is a really cool shorthand to do that. So now let's go ahead and run our project here. We see that expression is valid. Now, after 5 seconds, we get exported report 1. Hopefully after 5 seconds, this does report 2 now, report 3, and so on. So every 5 seconds, what you would see is this is going to report, and then it's going to loop back to report 1, hopefully now. And you can see that we've set that up, and we're actually now passing in custom data to that. And there we go, it's looped over. So it's really cool, and as I said, this cron schedule syntax is really easy. You're essentially just running your normal JavaScript functions in here, and you're using it, passing in data in the normal JavaScript way. So now let's take a look at task management, essentially. So how can we stop these tasks? How can we start them? And maybe defer when they actually start running. Maybe you want a different condition to hit first before you schedule a task. Let's look at how we can manage that using node-cron. So for task management, using the function we had before, what you first want to do is essentially turn this into a variable. So for us, we'll make that const task, and then that equals, and then we'll add in our schedule here. What this allows us to do is task here essentially becomes a scheduled task, and we can start to do some things like start and stop it. Another thing you want to do is maybe if you don't want to run this straight away initially, we can add in some schedule options. And the one I'm going to use is scheduled and then false, like so. If I go ahead and save this, what you'll see now is if I actually run my node index.js, we'll get is that expression valid true, but then the application's actually going to exit out as there is no cron task that it needs to look for, so it sees it as complete. But what if you did want to start this up later? You can now just do task, and then you can do start like so. Once we've done that, if we now go back and run our application, you'll see that the terminal stays open here and the application is still running, and we're getting that same logic we had before with the exporting runs. By the same logic, we can actually now get the task to stop. So if I go ahead and just quickly close this, if we did something like, let's say I do a set timeout here so we can actually see it running, and then we do a set timeout, and then inside of here, let's say we want to close this after, let's say 6 seconds. So I'll put in 6,000 here. Inside of here, all you need to do is do task.stop, and that will stop the scheduled task. If I console.log this as well, I'll say task stopped like so. We can go ahead and run this, and hopefully we should only see exported report 1, as it should only get the ability to run one of the tasks as it's running every 5 seconds. So we do that, we get that is valid, it's still open, exported report 1, and then this set timeout should run as well. And you can see there after 6 seconds instead is stopped the task. So we've stopped it there and we successfully managed our tasks there with task.stop and task.start. As I said, this is where maybe you'd add in additional conditions. Maybe firstly, you want to check that there are actually reports to export, and then you can do task.start, or maybe that you're actually connected to your database, and then you can do task.start to run the exporting database command. So that's a really quick overview of how we can actually use task scheduling. All you have to do is essentially make it a variable here. And then once you've done that, you can go ahead and use .start on the task and .stop like so. I'll also leave a link to the node-cron documentation where there's going to be a few more options you can do if you want to do some more complex stuff. But now let's look at a more complex example of exporting our database. So in this project here, what I have a script that is going to back up my database. And as you can see, we've got a database of movies.db here. At the moment, I have to run this manually by doing node and then backup.js like so. But I want to script this so that it's running, let's say, every minute for our example. So we can see in here, if I just look into the code quickly, what we have is we just have the database name. We get a formatted time just so the file names look nice. And then we have this backup database function, which is going to be the one that I want to schedule. And inside of here, we spawn the SQLite server and we connect to our database essentially. And then we run the backup functionality all in this line of code here. And you can see this is where I'm using the backup database function to actually do it when I run node backup.js. Now, if we want to schedule this, all we have to do is obviously we've installed node-cron already. So I can do import cron, and then we can say from node-cron like so. Then once we've done that is we're going to go to where we run this backup database function, which is this bit down here. And we're simply just going to wrap this in a cron.schedule. So for that, I can do cron.schedule. And then inside of here, I'll just do something like 5 asterisks as my expression. So we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like so. So that's going to run every minute now. And then once we've got that, we're going to do the arrow function here to add in our function. And then I'm going to move this backup database all inside of that like so. So there we go. This will now actually be a scheduled function and it will run my backup database every minute. So now all I have to do is run backup.js once, leave it running on the node server, and that should do the backups. And I'll also show you a bit later how you can monitor your cron in production so you can make sure that it is actually running without having to go and look into the file system every time. So now that we've got that, let's say I'll just put a console.log down here. So we can say console.log, and this is just going to be for starting the application. And we can say database backup scheduled like so. Now that we've done that, if I now go ahead and run my node backup.js, what we can see here is it says that database backup scheduled there. It does one of them to start, so that's on the minute. And then it's going to run one every minute that we hit. So you can see that it's now working and it's backed up our files. So this is more of an example or more complex example of where you'd actually want to use this functionality. So we've used it there to back up our database file here. And you'd probably want to run this maybe every night or maybe even every Sunday or something like that. And luckily, using cron expressions here, we have that really powerful syntax to do that whenever we want. But as I said, this is now actually quite an important function here. So how do we keep track of this in production and make sure that it's working without having to go into our file system and see that it's created a backup file each time? So as you've seen, when we run backup.js, our node application is going to be permanently running as long as our server is running. So we need some way to make sure that these tasks have actually completed, especially when it's something as crucial as a database backup here. You want to know if there's been any issues without having to be logged in or SSH'd into the server. BetterStack is an excellent tool for this purpose as it's going to actively monitor your jobs and send you alerts through various channels that you set up, whether it's emails, phone calls, texts, or Slack. If there's any issues, it's going to notify you, and that means that you can get in there and fix it promptly. So all you need for this is a free betterstack.com account, and we can come into here and we can create our first heartbeat. You just click in here to the uptime, you go to heartbeats, and we can create a heartbeat. Now I'm going to call this a minute database backup like so. So we'll just give this a friendly name so we know what it's doing. And then you can see here we have some options to expect a heartbeat. Obviously, I set my cron job for every minute. And then you can also have a grace period here, which as you can see here, this is the time the job needs to execute, because obviously you're going to be running your cron job every minute, but maybe it takes 30 seconds or so to execute. So for me, I'm just going to change this to something like 10 seconds as my one was quite simple. The next bit here we have is on-call escalation. This is to set up the rules for who's going to be notified and when an incident occurs. So for me, I'm just going to have this as send an email to myself if the job doesn't run. And then you can see there's also notify the entire team as a last resort and a load of other different options. And you can see you've also got options for if the person who's supposed to be on call doesn't acknowledge it, whether it should alert other people. So maybe there's someone on your team that handles these issues normally, but if they're not around, it can then as a backup go ahead and notify them. Once we've got that, we can hit create heartbeat. What you'll see here is we'll now get a URL here and we can copy that to the clipboard. It's important to note this should be a secret URL because obviously only you want to be sending your GET requests or POST requests to this. So you want to make sure to keep this secret and that way you know that your task is actually running. So we'll put this in an environment variable. So back in the code, I'm going to be adding this to my backup.js. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create that .env file. And I'm going to store my heartbeat URL in there. So I'll do something like heartbeat and then underscore URL. And then in here, I'll make this equal to the one that I just copied in like so. To use .env, I'm obviously going to have to install .env like so. And now that we've got that, I'm going to go back to my backup.js, just going to go up to the top here, and I'm going to make sure to import, and then we'll do .env/config like so. And now that we've got that, you want to go to where you have your scheduled tasks. So to use my heartbeat now, I'm just going to change a few things about this function. The first one is that we are going to want to await for when the backup database has completed. So to do that, I'm going to change this to an async function here. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this catch block here, and then we can add in an await for the backup database. And I'm also going to wrap this in a try catch block as well. So we can do try, we'll do await for the backup database. And then if that fails, we'll just catch the error and simply console log that in this case. So we'll do console.error and then error like so. Now in here, what we want to do is we want to ping our heartbeat once our task has completed, which is why I've moved this to async and we're doing this await here. So once we've awaited that the backup database task has completed, this is where we'll send off the heartbeat as that means this has been successful. And as you can see, this is where the grace period would come into effect because obviously if this is running every minute, but this takes 30 seconds, you want to add in a grace period of maybe 30 seconds or a little bit longer just in case there's a bit of different latency on the server. What we can do here is we can now send off a simple fetch request to our heartbeat. So we can do const response here, and then here we'll do await, and then I'll do fetch process.env, and then we're going to get that URL from our heartbeat URL that we set up in our env file. So that's going to be heartbeat and then underscore URL like so. Once we've got that, I'm also just going to check that we actually did get a response back. So for that, we can do if response.ok like so. So if it's not okay, we'll throw a new error with whatever that status text error was. So inside of here, we'll put the message as just response and then .status text like so. So if something does go wrong, maybe you deleted the heartbeat by accident, or maybe the server's lost connection to the internet, it's going to throw an error here. And you'll see that. So now that we've got that, we can go ahead and run our backup.js and we should start to see the heartbeat coming through on BetterStack. So if I now do node and then backup.js like so, you'll see we've got the database backup scheduled like we did before. You can see it's starting the database and now it's successfully backed one of them up. If I now go over to betterstack.com, what you can see is we've now got a ping that it was up and it said it's been up for 8 seconds and it tells you when it got the last heartbeat. So if we wait a minute here, you'll see that it will come in the next one and then we'll see the heartbeat. So there we go, it's been a minute now, and what you'll see is it was currently up for 1 minute 5 seconds, but now it just received another heartbeat. And you can see there that was the grace period coming into effect, as obviously my task was running every minute, but it looks like it took it about 5 seconds to run the next heartbeat. You can even see down here just when we got those heartbeats received, and you can see now the last heartbeat was recorded 20 seconds ago. And we also do have one incident here, and that was from when I set it up. And to show you a demo instant, let's see if I go to my code and I shut this down, say an error has occurred or something like that, and I go back to betterstack.com, what you'll see is after a minute, once this hits 1 minute and 10 seconds, because that's what I have for the grace period, it's going to record this as having an incident. It's going to send a notification to all of those channels, whether it was an email or phone call. I set up an email, so I'll put up the email on screen as well to show you what that looks like. And then it will notify you essentially that something's gone wrong and we need to take a look at it. So here we go. What you can see is we have our last heartbeat was recorded a minute ago, but it's notified that it is now down. I'll pop up the email that I got on screen as well. And you can see that we are now seeing that our heartbeat didn't come through like we expected, even in that grace period. And now that'll be a good notification for us to go in and see what went wrong with the server and maybe relaunch the script that we had. So I can go back to my application now. I can see that it crashed or something. I can launch node backup.js. Now that backup job is now scheduled. Now once that runs like so, what we should see is back on the BetterStack dashboard that it's going to send that heartbeat through after the next minute, and then we will know that it's run successfully. So there you go. Once I spun up my backup.js again, we can see the incident has now been resolved. We've got it back up and it says our last heartbeat was 17 seconds ago. You can even come down here and see how long your longest instants were for, how long your average instant is, and the availability of the heartbeat as well. So some really cool statistics that you can get out on the BetterStack dashboard here. So there you go. That's how you can use betterstack.com there and the heartbeats to monitor your scheduled jobs. This just gives you the safety of knowing you don't have to be logged in and looking at the logs of your server every time to make sure that your job was running, especially when it's something as critical as a database backup. You know that if it does miss a job, you're going to get a notification about it and someone can look at it and fix it promptly. That is everything I have to show you on node-cron there and how you can use it to schedule a task, whether it's something as critical as a database backup or a regularly scheduled email. You can use node-cron, leave the script running, and you have confidence knowing it's running there by using BetterStack. Now, if you want to watch a video on how you can use Redis in Node, watch this video here. But if you want to watch the video that YouTube is recommending, click this one here. As always, please subscribe and thank you very much for watching.